She confronted me, asked me who I was, and when I told her that I was in love with her man, I thought for sure I had the upper hand. I thought that would knock the smirk off her face. But I'd completely misread her. What I thought was a smirk was an invitation. She wanted me to tell her the truth. She looked at me and asked, "Is that his baby you're carrying?" So I told her yes. And Manny said, "Oh my God." This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Poetic Justice, Part 6. When we left off in Part 5, we found out all about how Operation Last Touch went down, and LJ and Q were leaving the round table to go and see about Wise, who we found out during bonus episode 1, parts 1 and 2, had found himself implicated in Amira's disappearance by Amira's best friend, his ex-girlfriend, Hanifa. Salima had put her foot in Hanifa's behind and then had her swiftly removed from the scene before police arrived. What Hanifa didn't realize was that Wise was not surprised to see her outside of Big Wood's house. The surveillance system was still in place. She was still being tailed. So he was alerted when she pulled up. He also wasn't surprised when DPD pulled up. Days before, Q had gotten a heads up from his contact in DPD that they'd been alerted to Amira's disappearance by Hanifa. And while initially they weren't willing to start a missing persons case, the details that she provided had at least piqued their interest. And after verifying some of the details, they decided to investigate whether the disappearance of the New Yorker was connected to the shootout in Dallas a couple weeks prior. So Wise, Mrs. Ali, and Salima's appearance at the scene was not by happenstance. It was a coordinated plan to ensure that Hanifa was not present when DPD arrived, and to control the environment in which Mrs. Ali would be questioned. When the police took Wise in, they asked Mrs. Ali if she could take the vehicle that he was driving back to the house. And when Mrs. Ali said, "I'm a New Yorker, I don't drive," they asked if there was someone else who could come and pick the vehicle up, like maybe Wise's wife. And Mrs. Ali said no, but since this is his boss's car, I'll call him. Then Mrs. Ali, who was in on the plan, let LJ know that it was go time. He appeared at the scene within a matter of minutes, drove the vehicle and Mrs. Ali back to Big Wood's house, and remained at the house while police questioned Mrs. Ali. And Mrs. Ali played the role of confused, concerned, and uncomfortable older Black Muslim woman. She also stuck to the script that Wise had provided her. She did not provide any unsolicited information, and she kept her answers to what she could prove and the police could verify. When they asked her about the laundromat shootout, she told them she did what everybody else did. She got out of there as soon as she could, but she had no idea who was behind it or why. When they asked why she and Amira had left New York, she said that her daughter said they needed to leave, and her son made it possible. Her son and his wife were expecting their first child, and she wanted to be there for every moment. When they asked about her apartment being ransacked, she said she didn't know anything about it. She wasn't there to see it, and she was glad that she was already in Dallas when it occurred. And when they tried to get her to hypothesize about what she thought may have happened to Amira and where she thought her daughter could have been, she shut them down, saying, "Now, it's one thing for me to hypothesize with my daughter's best friend. They've known one another for a very long time, and I'm sure that Hanifa knows things about my daughter that I don't. But I wouldn't dare have that kind of conversation with people who don't know her. What if she is missing? I would hate for you to think negatively of my baby based on what you've heard, and then not do everything in your power to find her. No offense, fellas, but in my experience, the police are not very sympathetic to possible victims who they don't see as innocent angels. So no, I will not be communicating with you about my prodigal child and her proclivity for trusting the wrong men and making poor decisions. She could be anywhere, with anyone, doing anything. And I'll leave it at that." When they asked if she thought her daughter was missing, she said, "I don't know." And when they asked why she hadn't attempted to file a missing persons report, she said, if parents filed missing persons reports every time they didn't know where one of their adult children were, despite the fact that we have no reason to expect them to be in any particular place, would you actually look for them? Before they could answer, she said, "Of course not. You wouldn't even make a report. Believe me, I've tried before, and I know countless other parents who have too. Eventually, we learn to look for them ourselves or wait for them to come back home. Because otherwise, we'd have the phone lines jammed up. People with immediate needs wouldn't be able to get through to 911. All for our grown kids to show up when they're good and ready, with a sob story in their hands out. Young men, one day your children will be grown. And take it from me, if they are anything like mine, you will sleep better at night if you pray for them let God be God, and go to bed. Stumped, unable to disagree with Mrs. Ali's logic, and recognizing that she was done talking, the officers ended the interview, and they left with the impression that Mrs. Ali had nothing to do with and no knowledge of whatever was going on with her daughter. She was simply a widowed, loving, concerned mother who'd been through the ringer with her wayward daughter and her jailbird son, who had no idea what all her daughter was into or what was going on the streets. And if she was hiding anything, it was in an effort to protect her daughter's already sullied reputation and to avoid the embarrassment of making something out of what could potentially be nothing. At the station, though, Wise was not getting the same treatment. The detectives knew about Wise's stint in prison, and despite his clemency, they saw him as a murderer whose sister had gotten caught up in a gang war that started in New York, followed her to Texas, and boiled over in the streets of Dallas. And they believed that he was somehow in on it. They asked him just about all of the same questions that they'd asked his mother, and he'd given them the same party lines, with a twist. He stuck to the script and waited for them to drop the hammer, because if they'd brought him in, there had to be one. Wise was not new to law enforcement investigations. Having grown up on the streets of New York City, he'd been involved in his fair share of interrogations. Having been incarcerated for 15 years, he'd been involved in quite a bit of criminal activity, more while he was in jail than when he wasn't. And being on Q and LJ's PI firm's payroll for a number of years, he knew that any time someone withheld information during a case, it was because they knew much more than they were saying. And knowing Amira and Hanifa, he knew that if Hanifa hadn't told him everything that Amira told her during that phone call in Star's car, then she probably knew a whole lot more about what had been going on with Amira lately than he could guess. And if she'd gotten the police to look into Amira's disappearance, then she had to have shared some of that with them. So when the detective asked, "So did anybody get those DNA test results?" Wise didn't even flinch. He said, "Anybody like who?" The detective said, "You, your mother." Wise said, "Why would we do that?" The detective said, "Because the parentage of your sister's baby was in question, was it not? As a matter of fact, I understand it was a point of contention." Wise said, "For who?" The detective said, "For your sister and your friend, Benjamin Woodrow Stevens Jr." Wise said, "Well, unfortunately, we held his memorial service today because he died, so he didn't get the results. And since I haven't seen or spoken to my sister, I don't know if she got the results. But since it wasn't my truth to find, I wasn't interested in finding it." Then the detective said, "And is there a reason why neither you nor your mother even mentioned that Amira is pregnant?" Wise said, "I can't speak for why my mother didn't mention it, but I can tell you why I didn't. When I talked to my sister in New York, she wasn't planning on keeping the baby." And before he could say another word, Q and a lawyer walked in. Q's brother-in-law, Ron Hobbs, said, "And that's enough, gentlemen. This interview is over. Amira is not missing, and I've got the proof." And he held up an envelope while saying, "Take a picture, make a copy, run it down, do whatever you need to do, but my client can't help you." Ron handed the envelope to the lead detective. The detective opened it, and inside was a letter from Amira with several photos of her on a beach. Her stomach was on flat, and in the letter, she admitted that Big Wood was not the father of that baby. She'd used the pregnancy as a ruse to get out of New York, to get money in her pockets, and to help the International Trafficking Organization get revenge on Wood and Q. She'd cashed out, gone to the Bahamas, gotten rid of said baby, and was never coming back. And since detectives had a handwriting sample provided to them by Hanifa, they could easily verify that the letter was in fact written by Amira. Since they had photos of Amira provided by Hanifa, they could easily verify that the photos enclosed in the letter were in fact of Amira in the Bahamas. And Wise was flabbergasted, but you wouldn't have known it by looking at him. When the three men went their separate ways, Wise and Q got in a vehicle, and Wise said, "What the hell was that?" Q handed him the letter and the photos. He read the letter and looked at the photos and asked, "Why is this the first time that I'm seeing this?" Q asked, "When's the last time somebody checked the mail at Big Wood's house? I sent Bree by here to make sure everything was good when you was getting pulled over, and she saw that the mailbox was busting at the seams. She didn't want it to look like your mother hadn't been staying there consistently, so she pulled all the mail. She went through it real quick in the car, found that all of it was junk or bills that are being paid online. And that letter was in there." Wise said, "Wow, so my sister is just as dirty as I thought she was, and she really isn't missing. Go figure." Q said, "Looks like it. Let's get to the safe house. Wise didn't even question the validity of the letter. It had the appropriate postage, the appropriate processing by the postal service. It was absolutely Amira's handwriting, her intonation, and her writing style. And it was definitely her in the photos in the Bahamas. If the photos had been digitally altered, he could not detect it. With that evidence in hand, the case was closed as far as he was concerned. He had what he needed to give his mother closure. And if there was anything else to be known about Amira's involvement in the attack on his mother and Big Wood's death, he knew that the families would get to the bottom of it. What he didn't know was his sister was not alive and well in the Bahamas. 2 weeks earlier, when Sykes got True out of that alley and back to the safe house about an hour outside of Dallas, after she finished tearing up the exercise room, True's plan had been solidified. Amira would be questioned at gunpoint, forced to write a letter confessing everything, and to make sure it was believable, her handwriting, writing style, and word choices would be compared to the journal that True and the team had found in Mrs. Ali's Bronx apartment when they ransacked it after they'd snatched Amira off the New York streets. She'd be sedated and transported to the Bahamas on a Lopez plane, arranged by Stephanie, escorted by 3 soldiers, a lieutenant, and a female finisher named Nikki, all of whom owed True a few favors. With the threat of being unalived over her head, she'd pose for photos alone and with a mystery man whose face would be hidden, giving the appearance that she was living it up. The soldiers would also ensure that she was captured on video, bailing the letter and the printed photos, before expeditiously returning to Texas in the safe house, where she would be treated family style, until Trude gotten all of the information out of her that she could, and Big Wood's prognosis, one way or the other, was assured. Amira was no longer in the land of the living, because when Angela called True and told her that Big Wood's prognosis was not good and Miss Charlotte had signed the DNR, True pulled the trigger on the final phase of Amira's interrogation. She learned her lesson with that Amir experience, and since then, she'd had Renni teach her all about using her True serum while monitoring her victim's vitals. So while Renni was at the hospital with the family, True was verifying all of the information that Amira had given her thus far. And since she didn't plan to preserve Amira's life, she kept the questioning going until Amira was not in any condition to talk at all. And Amira had talked, because her brother Amir had told her everything. He hadn't managed to keep his spot as a right hand for as long as he did. By being gullible, he knew that if Stanley was going to double-cross 2 of the 5 families, there had to be a darn good reason. And there had to be more to it than him being caught with his hands in the cookie jar. So before he agreed to help Stanley, he and Stanley swapped secrets. And he hadn't planned to set Amira up in New York when he had her pretending to be Nigel's mistress because she slept with Big Wood and told Wise about it. He'd set her up because the fact that she slept with Big Wood, told Wise about it, and didn't tell him, meant that all that he'd shared with her was probably not safe, and he needed to eliminate her before she double-crossed him in an effort to get Big Wood. She knew exactly who was behind the entire scheme, and she knew why. When it wasn't possible for her to tell True another thing, True looked at her and said, "I'd like nothing more than to watch you die a slow, painful death. But the clock is ticking, and I gotta get out of here. The fact that you did all of this because you wanted my man and my life and some money that you didn't earn is all the proof that I need that hell is waiting for you. And when you get there, tell your brother that the truth said what's up." Then she double-tapped and ended Amira's life. 2 weeks later, the Q dropped Wise off at the safe house where Salima was waiting for him with Hanifa and several special guests. He returned to the round table. While he was gone, the Queen Mother, Angela, Manny, and Idra were having a life-changing conversation. When the room had been cleared, the Queen Mother had said, "When you asked me, how did we get all of the information about the plot that Amir was involved in, I told you we got most of it from Amir's phones, from tracking the team that he'd assembled in New York, and from the people that we'd captured and questioned. What I didn't tell you is that I received a full typed confession in the mail from Amira, most of which included information that I already knew. And most of the things that I didn't know, we've already confirmed by other means. The rest of it, we need to confirm with Stanley." Angela said, "For the record, most of it's already been confirmed by multiple different parties during the raids today. But there are some details that only Stanley can provide." Then the Queen Mother picked up saying, "Idra, your observation was correct. When you said that this had to be about more than Stanley trying to keep his immoral criminal behaviors under wraps, this was not business. It was personal, and I intended to have this conversation with you, Manny, before the round table. But I thought that it was important that your responses to the revelations be authentic. And I also thought that it was important that the person whose story it is be the one to tell it. Now she picked up her phone, called Marley, and said, "Send her in." And in walked Nadia Charles, Stanley's mother, Idra's sister, and the Queen Mother's best friend. Idra and Manny looked confused. Nadia pulled up a seat and signed. There isn't any way to tell you all of this without starting at the beginning. When I was 17 years old and splitting my time between Trinidad with Mommy's family and St. Lucia with ours, my best friend introduced me to a family friend, a man who was a little older, more experienced, and absolutely captivating. And he stole my heart. I fell in love, and I thought that I would spend the rest of my life with him. I believe that he loved me too. He didn't take my virtue. I freely gave it. And when he tried to do the honorable thing, when he asked Poppy for my hand, Poppy said no. Poppy knew what I didn't. That man was being groomed to be an instrumental part in his family's criminal enterprise. While he wasn't intended to be the heir, the future of his family's organization was unknown, and Poppy was wise enough to know that no matter what role he played, it would be a risk to the life and safety of his only daughter. And he didn't want that for me. He wanted me as far away from the life as I could get. That was why he sent me to Trinidad, to deaf school. But I was drawn to the flames. It was why I befriended a girl who would go on to be the queenpin. Why I fell so fast and so hard for a man who went on to be the kingpin of one of the largest, most prolific, most influential international criminal organizations the world has ever seen. And all eyes went to Manny. Nadia continued signing, saying, "And why I went on to marry one of my father's lieutenants." And while that was certainly not his preference either, his hands were tied. When he refused that man's proposal of marriage, I ran away. I told my best friend about the predicament that I was in. I asked her to help me out of it, and she refused. But because she was a good friend, a loyal friend, she agreed to hide me instead. She also agreed to keep me informed about what was going on with my family and the man that I loved. It broke her heart to tell me that unlike me, that man had accepted my father's no. He understood and respected my father's position. His father had convinced him to move on, convinced him to find and take a wife, to lick his wounds and prepare for his future. And I was devastated. I thought that I'd return home in a few months, reveal my secret, and force my father to approve a marriage between me and the man that I loved. Instead, my father had figured out that my best friend had been helping me hide. He'd sent his lieutenant, Anon Charles, no relation, to follow my best friend and locate me. And when he did, he overheard our conversation and discovered my secret. I begged and pleaded with him not to reveal it, not to tell my father where I was, and to help me remain in hiding. He agreed to do just that, but he'd also confessed that he was in love with me, that he'd been in love with me for a long time, that if I would have him, that if I'd give him a chance, he'd not only keep me safe, keep my secret, and keep me hidden, but he'd cover my shame. And I agreed, not because I loved him, not because I couldn't see another way out, but because I was hurt, humiliated, and embarrassed. The fact that the man that I loved could move on so easily, the fact that he could just move on and forget about me, the fact that even my best friend not only agreed with my father's decision, but she also agreed with that man's position, had completely taken the wind out of my sails. So I told Anon that I'd do it, but only if he could convince my father to let me stay away until I was ready to come home. And if he could orchestrate a way for me to see the man that I loved with the woman that he'd chosen with my own two eyes. I needed to know whether she loved him, whether she could make him happy, whether he was happy. Anon did everything that I asked. And then he got me to Puerto Rico. And I saw the man that I loved, clearly in love with another woman. And she was clearly in love with him. I was so stupefied that I guess I gave myself away because she noticed me. We made eye contact. And when the two of them parted ways, she came back and found me. She confronted me, asked me who I was. And when I told her that I was in love with her man, I thought for sure I had the upper hand. I thought that would knock the smirk off her face. But I'd completely misread her. What I thought was a smirk was an invitation from a beautiful, regal, classy, clearly intelligent woman. I mean, she was well-versed in ASL for no reason that I could tell. She wanted me to tell her the truth. She looked at me and asked, "Is that his baby you're carrying?" And she knocked me off my feet. I thought that my growing baby bump was well hidden. I had no idea how she knew. I later learned that she was in school to become a OBGYN, and she just happened to have the eye. When I looked in her eyes, I didn't see aggression, ruthlessness, or a challenge. I saw a woman who was ready and willing to help me. So I told her yes. And Manny said, "Oh my God." Nadia kept signing. She said, and then she asked me, "Are you ready to tell him? You know that if you do, he's going to do the right thing. But if you're not going to tell him now, don't tell him ever. If you're here to claim him and tell him everything. But if you're not ready for everything that comes with that, walk away." Nadia said. I walked away. Nan took me back to my hiding place. I cried all the tears that I could. And then I gave the man who actually wanted me a chance. When I returned home, Anan protected me. He covered me. He took responsibility for my baby, demanded my hand in marriage, retired from the life, joined his family's legitimate business, and made me a wife, legitimizing my son, Stanley. Manny asked, how did he find out that I'm his father? And why didn't you ever tell me? Nadia said, because sometimes when you love someone, you have to make decisions based on what's best for them, not what's best for you. You didn't need a deaf wife. If you would have married me, your life wouldn't be what it is today. I would have been a liability.